such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today's case is about the brutal murder and neglect of Teghan Skiba. Now, this true crime case is one none of us want to hear, and I understand if you can't. Harming children is unfathomable evil, but I bring this case to you because Teghan didn't have a choice that this happened to her. She couldn't avoid the pain. She couldn't speak out. So I'm telling her story today as a warning to many that ignoring abuse is the worst kind of neglect, the kind that can lead to death. Now, if you don't know, it is my absolute passion to tell these stories, and I mean no harm or disrespect when I do so. So if that's something you'd like to support me in doing, all you have to do is make sure you are subscribed with your post notification bell on, giving this video a thumbs up, and leaving a nice comment down below. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 2010 in North Carolina, and the Skiba/Reyes family lived in Smithfield. Now this was 27-year-old Helen Roxanne Reyes, and she was a mother to 4-year-old Teghan Alyssa Skiba. Now years prior, Helen had actually been dating a man named Jerry Skiba. They had met at an Applebee's, and they were dating when she ended up getting pregnant. Now Teghan was born on July 6th of 2006 in Raleigh, and she quickly earned the nickname of Teggy. Now, as she grew up, she loved to play outside. That was one of her favorite things to do. She would always say, you know, the sun is up, I want to go outside. And she just absolutely loved the outdoors. She loved playing with purple butterflies and ladybugs. She always wanted to go swimming and plant flowers in her grandmother's garden, but she also loved making necklaces, and she would basically take any item she could find and piece together these DIY, kids looking necklaces that she would wear. Now, before Teghan ever relaxed on her own after, a day of playing as a child, she would go and cover up all of her toys, her stuffed animals with her own blanket to make sure that they were cozy and warm before she relaxed. She was a sweet little girl, and for her first few years of life, her and her mother Helen had actually lived at Helen's parents' homes, and this was Gerald and Sarah, but to Teghan they were known as Papa Gerald and Grandma Sarah, and Teghan absolutely adored them. Now, she spent so much time playing with them and making memories with them, and they just made sure to cut out time for her to really be able to get to know their granddaughter and have her know that she was loved by them. Now, her father Jerry was no longer in the picture at this time. It turned out he was quite violent, and he and Helen had separated shortly after her being born, but by this point he was actually in jail because he had gone there on drug charges, and since then, he really didn't have anything to do with his daughter. Helen didn't bring her to the jail or anything, so Teghan really just was with a single mother. But by the time Teghan was 4, she began not seeing her grandparents very much. You see, after what Helen described as a blowout between her and her own mother, Sarah, the two, Helen and Teghan, moved out of the home. And every time that Sarah and Gerald would try to call Helen and talk to Teghan, their granddaughter, Helen wouldn't answer. And by July of 2010, they hadn't talked to their grandchild or child in months. Since about January of that year, but the next they would hear, Teghan was at the hospital. Their beautiful, happy granddaughter was now fighting for her life. This was July 16th, 10 days after her 4th birthday, and she was at the Johnston Medical Hospital, and she had been taken there by a 21-year-old man named Jonathan Richardson. She was unconscious when he brought her there, and he claimed that she had been jumping on the air mattress that they had when she fell off and hit her head, and that is why she had these head injuries. But it turned out that Teghan's mother, Helen, was actually out of the state at this time because she was in the Army, and she had to go to New Mexico for the Army Reserves training that lasted about 10 days. And so she had been gone for those 10 days. And so Jonathan was said to be Helen's boyfriend at this time, and he had agreed to watch over Teghan. But when the doctors arrived in Teghan's room, they immediately knew that her injuries were much worse than what Jonathan was saying. I mean, she had cuts, bruises and bite marks. There were many injuries all over her body, and soon after she was transferred to another hospital that cared for children, which was about an hour away, which was called the UNC Medical Center, and she was admitted into the intensive care unit for children, and that is when they got a much closer look. A red trauma alert was then placed, calling every doctor possible to come in and look at this little girl and help to save her life. A physician who had been working for 25 years, who had seen lots of different tragedies and horrific states that people had come in looking like, said that this was so horrific that he nearly vomited. Dr. Caucus said that there were scars all over her body from what appeared to be whip marks, and there was no part of her body that had been spared. He said that startling was not the right word, but it was deeply disturbing, and she was such a small, pale, frail little thing. The worst part, though, was that she had a brain injury that was thought to be internal bleeding, possibly a blood clot that was causing swelling in her brain, and you could actually see that something was protruding from inside of her head. Now, this was causing her entire body to shut down, and she also needed a blood transfusion, and at this point she was rushed to surgery so they could cut open her head and give her brain some space to be able to expand as it was trying to. There was a heaviness in her room that day. I mean, these doctors who had dealt with patients every day who weren't going to make it said that Teghan's case was different. You see, Dr. Jeff Williams said that her low blood count wasn't actually because of the brain swelling and the internal bleeding. It was due to all of the other injuries. They were all at various stages of infection, meaning that they had been inflicted at different times. He said that Teghan had been suffering for a long time. After doing all they could, it still wasn't enough. And 4-year-old Teghan Skiba died on July 19th, 2010 at 6:35 p.m., 3 days after she was admitted. With these 66 bite marks on her body from head to toe and chunks of skin missing, they knew that this wasn't some accident. And these bite marks also were believed to belong to an adult. They were too big to be the size of a child. And so they knew that with that, along with the persistent signs of sexual assault, where one of her nipples as well as her fingernails were missing, and the copper wire fragments under her skin, that this had been torture. The man who brought her in, her mother's supposed boyfriend, was going to be brought down to the police department for questioning. This whole time he was claiming that the night before she had fallen off this air mattress. When she was jumping on it, she had hit her head and she kind of acted like she was hurt, so he gave her an ice pack. But the next morning she was still acting very dizzy, so he decided to take her to the hospital. When asked about the bite marks on her body, Jonathan said that she had been on a play date with her cousin, who was a boy named Skylar, and that maybe that is where she got the bite marks from. He also said that any other marks or injuries could be her eczema flaring up. Now, he also admitted that he did hit her once accidentally with a cord, and it hit her vagina. But this was only once. Now, there was a nurse that was looking after Teghan at the first hospital that she was admitted to. Her name was Mary Butler, and she immediately knew that something was wrong when she looked at Teghan. She yelled out, "Oh my God," when looking at her body, and she then looked at the man who had brought her in and was so disgusted with him that she started going after him. Now, the reason she did so was because when everybody began to look Jonathan's way, he decided suddenly he needed to get up and move his truck from where he was in the parking lot. As he was trying to leave the hospital, Mary tackled him to the ground after chasing him down the hallway, grabbed him by the throat, slung him around, and forced him back inside the hospital. She actually put him into a room so he couldn't escape, and at this point the police were already being called due to this case of what they believed to be child abuse. And so when the police arrived, Mary actually turned to them and asked them for a gun. She said, "I'm going to do what needs to be done right here, right now." Now, of course, they didn't allow her to, and soon after, Teghan was then transferred to the second hospital. Now, while the doctors were trying to figure out what exactly had happened to her, Dr. Caucus believed that she had possibly been violently shaken due to other cases that were similar to hers that had that exact diagnosis. Now, he also believes she had very little brain function due to the fact that when she was brought into the hospital, she was poked with a needle in her foot and she had only a little tiny response. And normally, if there is brain function, they get a little bit more of a response. Now, the doctor also thought she was one step away from being brain dead. And so that's why they were working so quickly. But she also had acid in her blood due to poor circulation of air. While her mother and her grandparents were informed, Papa Gerald and Grandma Sarah were finally able to see their granddaughter, to know what had happened to her after months of not being able to get a hold of her or see her. And that is when they found out that Helen and Teghan had been staying with Helen's new boyfriend, who lived at his grandparents' home. Now, they did not live inside of the home with Jonathan's grandparents. They actually lived outside on a barn or a shed. Now, this did have air conditioning, however, it didn't have running water or a bathroom, and their bed was actually a blow-up air mattress on the floor. Jonathan and Helen had met at a nightclub a few months prior, and they had been together for the past 7 months, and it was around that January, the same time that the grandparents lost the ability to talk to their child or their grandchild. They'd only been living in this barn together for the past few months, and I couldn't find anywhere why they chose to live in the barn, and I'm sure it really did have a lot to do with money, but they weren't in the best sort of living situation, but it was something. Now, like I told you, Teghan's death was not long after her 4th birthday, and her birthday was on July 6th. But a day prior to that, on July 5th, Teghan had driven the car with Helen and Jonathan because they were dropping Helen off for her military training. Now, Teghan told her mother goodbye, and her mother left her in the care of her boyfriend, Jonathan, not knowing this would be the last time she would see her daughter alive. Or did she? When investigators arrived at the UNC hospital to look over Teghan's body, the doctor actually rolled her over on her side, and that is when Detective Matt De Silva had to walk away because it was so disturbing to look at, and he couldn't bear to see how this little girl had been treated any longer. He claimed that it was the worst thing he had ever seen in his life. And this is the point that her clothing was actually sent to the lab to be tested for forensics. Her black pants were sent in that were only a size 4T. That shows you how small and fragile this little girl was. And there was a presence of blood that was believed to be Teghan's. The autopsy then came back and it revealed that Teghan's cause of death was a blow to the head, and this was most likely not from a single object, but more of a traumatic impact. At this point, Jonathan was in custody and he did begin talking. He said that the night prior, he was sleeping on the air mattress with Teghan when he woke up to see that she had, peed and pooped on the bed. She was a 4-year-old and she was still kind of overcoming some potty training issues, and this caused him to become enraged. He admitted that he lost it, and he began whipping her with an electrical cord. Jonathan then asked the deputies if they were going to tie him down and cut him up. And he said all this while a smile was plastered on his face. He also admitted that he was bipolar and that little things set him off. But he said, "I'm going to be in prison for the rest of my life, ain't I?" Investigators then headed to Jonathan's grandparents' home to look, behind their house in this shed. It was on the outskirts of town. It was also littered with trash. There was this overwhelming smell of feces and urine, and inside they found that it was just as messy. There was a blood, like a little blood splatter kind of all over the room on different objects, but there was also a piece of tissue with blood on it. Now inside of this little shed was the air mattress, then there was a chair and a treadmill. In between the chair and the treadmill, there was actually a laptop as well. That is where they found the extension cord. It was frayed at the end and copper wire was exposed. But the most horrific evidence would come from a camera found inside of that shed. The footage showed Teghan on the days prior to her death. Now, it was believed that it was 6 days prior that this video footage was caught. However, timestamps were wrong on the camera, and investigators tried to piece together when this exactly happened, but were not exactly sure. So at some point prior to her death, supposedly when her mother was out of town, Teghan was shown facing a wall with her arms outstretched, being yelled at by Jonathan to speak up. You see, he was forcing her, as she was, I guess, in timeout, to say, "When I have to pee or poop, I promise I will tell someone." This was at 2:30 in the morning that he was making her do this, and it went on for 37 seconds as far as we know. However, we don't know how long it was for this little Teghan to be doing this. We don't know how many times she'd been forced to do this before, all because she was struggling with potty training. Now, there was allegedly more videos and pictures found on this camera. However, none of those have been released. There were rumors of a video of Teghan against a wall begging Jonathan to stop hurting her. And she was saying that she wouldn't have any accidents as long as he stopped hurting her. But of course, this was chosen not to be shown, and nobody besides the investigators and the people involved in the case know if this is true or not. Jonathan Richardson was officially charged with first-degree murder and felony child abuse, inflicting serious bodily injury. Yet he was also found talking with his mother and her mother, Helen, while he was at the hospital, saying that he loved Teghan to death, that she called him daddy. He said that it wasn't looking good for her and that she really wasn't breathing. And then he asked his mother if that was a bad thing, and he also wanted to go to church. He made sure to tell them that he didn't do it and he didn't mean to hurt her. But it turned out that this wasn't the first time this little girl had been harmed. You see, a month prior to her murder, Teghan had been seen with a black eye. Now, when her mother saw her face, it was believed that she took a picture. There is a picture with Teghan with a black eye, and it is believed that her mother took this picture, and after finding this, she confronted Jonathan about this and almost broke up with him, yet for some reason she stayed with him. She also stayed with Jonathan after he sent her a picture of Teghan holding a beer with a cigarette in her mouth. There was also a time when Helen had gone to the store and came back to find Teghan with a cut on her head and crying, and Helen claimed that Jonathan told her she had just hit it on a bicycle. Then on a beach trip, Teghan had an injured eye, but Jonathan said it was simply from a wave. Next, it was welts on her, and Jonathan said that he had whipped her with a power cord. Helen then yelled at Jonathan not to touch her daughter anymore, and she went in and gave Teghan extra love, but she didn't leave her abuser, nor did she tell anyone about this abuse. When it was time for Jonathan's trial, the 16 jurors were excused due to photos shown between the prosecutors and the doctors. They were incredibly brutal and hard to look at, even for the most experienced people in this case, and so lots of them did have to leave. And when the video was shown of Teghan repeating the phrase over and over that she would not pee or poop anymore without telling somebody, many of the jurors actually burst into tears. The officers and experts took the stand to testify, struggling to speak without crying themselves. The prosecution went straight in with Teghan's photos, showing the jury that she was the reason that they were there, that somebody had brutally harmed that beautiful girl, and that she had been through 10 days of abuse and torture. And they found that the day that Jonathan had dropped Helen off, he actually stopped at Lowe's to pick up a hasp, which is like a padlock. and that was what was found locking the barn door. A lock they believed was used to keep Teghan in and everyone else out, everyone who could save her from getting to her. For the next 10 days, it was believed she didn't leave that shed, but Jonathan did go to Walmart to buy first aid supplies. The prosecutor ended his opening statement with, "None of us will be the same." Now, Jonathan's grandmother testified, saying that she tried to enter the shed around the time that this had occurred, during those 10 days. Now, her name was also Helen, the same as Teghan's mother, so we're going to tell her apart from Teghan's mother by calling her grandmother Helen. So Grandma Helen had said that she went to the doorstep, she saw diarrhea, and she also smelled urine and feces. She knocked on the door only to hear Jonathan yell at Teghan to get away from the door. Then nobody answered, so she left. But she didn't call Child Protective Services. She didn't report this because she didn't want Teghan to be taken away. Now, Teghan's mother's sister was someone who was around them at some points, and she admitted she had once seen Jonathan pick up Teghan and shake her to try to get her to be quiet. Now, she could see the harmful things that Jonathan was doing to Teghan. Just imagine how many things Teghan's mother was witnessing when they were alone. The prosecution had also created a mold for the bite marks that were on Teghan's body to compare to Jonathan's teeth. And they said that, his teeth were unique. Every set of teeth is unique, and they were a match. Jonathan remained unbothered throughout the whole trial. He showed no emotion, even though everyone else in that courtroom was sobbing. He was said to be a sadist and a killer who was cold-hearted and totally without remorse. Now, Jonathan's defense argued that Jonathan wanted to be a part of a perfect family, and that Teghan and Helen were giving him that, and that he loved Teghan dearly, but he had been abused as a child, and that caused him to have untreated mental problems, and that because of that, he killed her out of anger, not intent, and he did not sexually assault her. Now, this was said even though there were signs of sexual assault on her body. The defense then asked the jury to look at his childhood, and it was said that Jonathan came from a middle-class family who were amazing together until they got divorced. However, even though they appeared like a perfect family, they were anything but. You see, his mother, Sandy Creech, had actually hired a hitman to kill his father, Doug Richardson. This was when he was about 1 year old, and somebody had called Doug to try to buy their dog that they were selling, and so Doug opened the door to him, only to be shot 3 times, once in the head. Now, Doug did survive this, and he was rushed to the hospital. He made it out, and so, of course, he could say, what had happened. So his wife, Sandy, ended up going to trial for conspiracy to commit murder, and she was found not guilty and was released. Obviously, Sandy and Doug divorced after this, but this left Doug with lots of physical and mental, disabilities, as well as just struggles. During the custody hearing for their now 3-year-old son, Jonathan, Doug did get primary custody and Sandy would see him on the weekends. However, the defense claimed that after the attack, Doug was this whole different person, that he was abusive, that he neglected Jonathan, and then when Jonathan was in kindergarten, Sandy actually called CPS on Doug, saying that Doug was abusing their son. When they went to the door, Doug did talk to them, but refused to allow them to talk to Jonathan. That is when they went to the school, and Jonathan told them that he was beaten by his father. However, Doug did sign a contract saying that he would no longer beat his son, and so they pretty much left it at that and left Jonathan in Doug's care. Yet this came out, and then Doug's girlfriend at that time testified that she was with him pretty much the whole time that he had Jonathan as he was growing up, and Doug was not an abusive man. He was a great father who took him on fishing trips. She said that he raised his voice at him, he spanked him occasionally, but it was only like a handful of times. but that was just when, he did something wrong like most parents do, and she said he was not abusive. Now in high school, Jonathan went from getting good grades to failing every class, and he was turning into this very angry boy. He had no friends, and that is why the defense claimed that he didn't kill Teghan with intent. The defense also said that Teghan's mother, Helen, taught Jonathan that abusing her daughter was appropriate due to her approval when it happened. And that because Jonathan was only 21 years old, he didn't know how to take care of a little girl. The defense said he should not be charged with first-degree murder. That is when a forensic pediatrician named Dr. Sharon Cooper came forward saying, "In my opinion, Teghan Skiba was a victim of child torture. She had more than 144 injuries. This is an extraordinarily high number of injuries. The presence of a new injury over an old injury will cause this child to have that much more pain, and that would be another type of action that would strongly support sadistic gratification." Papa Gerald and Grandma Sarah actually had to leave during this woman's testimony because it was so graphic, and she really wanted to show how sadistic you would have to be to commit this kind of abuse. Now that is when a psychologist for the defense claimed that Jonathan was quite a disturbed individual, but they could not pinpoint an exact diagnosis of mental illness. The psychologist also said, though, that this was a life-changing event for Jonathan, who lost his daughter and had even tattooed her name and birth date on his arm while in jail. But the question many had was Teghan's mother, Helen, partially responsible for this? Her sister said that she was a loving, caring mother who was always kissing and hugging Teghan and giving her so much love, and Helen even testified at Jonathan's trial, saying that she should have never left Teghan alone and that she made a mistake and misses her daughter every single day. She said that she was testifying for her baby, for Teghan, and for her justice. She said that she had fallen in love with Jonathan, and he taught Teghan how to hook minnows for fishing, and that he was mainly a father figure for her. Now, it was found that several months before Teghan was murdered, Jonathan did try to leave Helen, and yet again they stayed together, and then Jonathan offered to watch Teghan while she was gone, and she trusted him. Helen said that Teghan really liked him and wanted him to be her dad, and as Jonathan heard this in court, this was the first time he showed any emotion, wiping his eyes. Judge Thomas Locke looked at every single photo, every single video that most people could not stomach because he had to. And there was actually almost a retrial because while the jurors were out eating at a Golden Corral one day, they had come across a woman who began to scream at them that they needed to find Jonathan guilty. And a juror came forward saying, we just want to say this. It could be something that means that the jurors can't remain impartial. And so all of the jurors were asked, do you think you can remain impartial? And they did all say they could, and so the trial could continue. After 1 hour of deliberation, Jonathan was found guilty. The defense then tried to save him from the death penalty, saying that he would have enough of a hard time because he had heard a child and other prisoners attack prisoners that attack children. However, the prosecution ended their statements by saying, "There's a darkness in him. I want you to remember something, that when good people do nothing, darkness prevails. I know you won't let it prevail in this case." 3 hours of deliberation later, he was sentenced to death in 2014. Jonathan said nothing, showed no emotion, and was led out of the courtroom. The main person heard crying in the courtroom was actually his mother. However, it was found that Jonathan was having some behavioral problems in jail during this trial. He was inciting inmates to do his dirty work. He also threatened to stab a detention officer, and he had actually made a shank with his toothbrush. He also began to throw feces of his own at the staff members. He was given mood stabilizing medication as well as being kept in lockdowns, but nothing was helping, and they didn't know what to do because no amount of punishment would stop him. Now, Jonathan's mother, Sandy Creech, the woman who allegedly tried to hire a hitman to kill her husband, who was Jonathan's father, was in the courtroom. I do want to say, by the way, that I could not find any information on Sandy Creech and this, hitman to kill Doug Richardson, so I cannot be 100% sure that that was even true, but that is something that was said at trial. But after her son had been sentenced to death, she came forward saying that he is still her son and that she loves him dearly, and that she now believes he needs her more than ever. She couldn't believe that Jonathan could do this, and she'd also forgiven him. But she did make a statement to the Teghan's family saying that she didn't know what was happening or she would have done something, and she is sorry that this happened. Now, Helen, Teghan's mother, was also arrested on a felony negligent child abuse causing serious bodily harm. She rejected every plea deal that was offered to her, including testifying against Jonathan. She did so on her own, but that granted her nothing, no leniency at all. She had been free on bond until 2019 when her trial began. At this point, she was 35 years old. She had gotten a new job. She also had an 8-month-old baby girl. She was then sentenced to 18 to 31 months in prison. Do you believe she could have prevented her daughter's death? Was this a case of neglect when Helen witnessed her baby girl being abused by this monster, and yet she continued to stay? You have to wonder if Helen knew that leaving Teghan with Jonathan was a bad idea. What kind of mother can witness the abuse of their child and not immediately want to take the baby out of that situation? Was Jonathan such a good manipulator that she believed all the lies he was telling her about why Teghan was getting into all these accidents and her injuries? Helen had parents who would have taken care of Teghan while she was gone. Even Jonathan's grandparents said they would do so, and yet she left him with a man who was known to hurt her. Do you believe Jonathan's grandparents could have stopped this? They were on the property during that time. They said nothing, yet they had to have known that something wrong was going on. I mean, his grandmother even went up to the shed. The most blame is still on Jonathan for immediately going to buy a lock and knowing exactly what he was going to do to that baby girl while her mother was away. It's not on Teghan for having issues with potty training. In fact, I don't believe that had anything to do with it. I believe he had a plan of what he was going to do to her. Potty training can be something that is even harder for children who are abused or have been in the past or have been traumatized. And I believe that this murder could have been stopped. Someone took a picture of Teghan with that black eye, and allegedly it was her own mother. Now, I don't say this lightly because I know how serious claims of neglect are. But I believe Teghan Skiba was failed by her family. I want to take a moment to thank all of you, because although these stories are researched by me and they're hard to research, you guys give me so much strength to do so, and you help me give a voice to these victims who didn't have any. And it means the world to me, every view you give me, because of that, and because I can help because of you. It's not me that's doing that. It's you guys that continue to let me have a voice in order to give the victims a voice. And I am eternally grateful for every single one of you. And I hope that Teghan Skiba, whether you believe in heaven or not, is in a better place where she is loved the way she should have been loved, and where she gets to be a beautiful, happy child. So don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces.